Today marks exactly 108 years since James Connolly's murder by the British state. But we don't gather here to mourn. We gather here to remember, commemorate, and celebrate the continuation of the anti-imperialist struggle, both here and abroad. We gather knowing that our role is not to weep at injustice, historic and ongoing, but to organise and fight against it. This year, we have two fantastic speakers on the topic. The first of our speakers today will be Jimmy Corcoran, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland, who will offer our perspective and analysis on the ongoing anti-imperialist struggle in Ireland.
Comrades and friends, we are gathered to honour the memory of James Connolly, who was murdered by British imperialism exactly 108 years ago today, May 12, 1960. Connolly was an internationalist. How could he not be? He was a Marxist, and proletarian internationalism is a central tenet of Marxism. Not merely because it is right and just that we should offer support and solidarity to all those struggling against imperialism, but because, as Connolly recognised, capitalism is a world system of exploitation, and a victory for the working class in one country weakens the global system and aids the revolutionary forces worldwide. But Connolly was also an Irish patriot. He rejected the sham internationalism which claimed that being part of the British Empire made Ireland stronger. This claim was not merely the position of Carson and labour unions such as the Walkerites, it was also the position of Redmond and the Home Rule Party. While Redmond wanted self-government for Ireland, he wanted to remain within the Empire. The Home Rule supporting capitalists and large farmers on the whole wanted to be part of the large single market that was the British Empire. That was why they rallied to the flag of Britain when the inter-imperialist First World War broke out. Both Redmond and Carson were united in sending the sons of the Irish poor off to war in the interests of British imperialism. For Redmond, the interests of the Irish nation were synonymous with those of the capitalist class, and the newspapers of the time, both Home Rule and Unionist, urged the young men of Ireland to enlist in the British Army to kill or be killed for the so-called liberties guaranteed by the Empire. The genius of Connolly is that he clearly articulated that the struggle for national independence and the struggle for socialism were not separate, but that the fight to break free from Ireland was not narrow nationalism, but part of the international struggle against imperialism. The last 20 months of Connolly's life were against the background of the First World War. In his writings, he campaigned against the war, and he called for the Irish labour movement to take a class position independent of the bourgeoisie. He highlighted the contradiction between the stated war aims of British imperialism to free small nations and the reality of empire, which was a prison for the subject nations, Ireland included. In August 1914, he asked, "Has Germany ever harmed Ireland? No. Has England ever harmed Ireland? Yes. The whole history of our connection has been a history of English war upon Ireland. And then we are to take up arms and proceed to murder a nation that has never harmed us, and to do it at the call of a nation that destroyed our national life, murdered our civilization, devastated our country, slew with famine untold millions of our people, hanged or imprisoned the best and bravest of our race." 108 years on from the 1916 Rising, the more things change, the more they stay the same. On the world stage, US imperialism has replaced Britain as the dominant and most aggressive power. However, it is in relative decline, primarily because of the growth of the People's Republic of China, but also as other capitalist powers, particularly in the global south, increasingly see the US-controlled, rules-based international order as an impediment to their own capitalist development. This decline is seen in the gradual weakening of the US dollar and of the economic strength of US imperialism. In an attempt to maintain its position of dominance, US imperialism is increasingly preparing for war against capitalist Russia and socialist China. Public opinion within the US, the EU, and the UK is being manipulated to accept that war against Russia and the People's Republic of China is both inevitable and justified. Opinion pieces in the capitalist press and pronouncements from military and political leaders claim more money must be spent on so-called European defence, despite the fact that NATO is responsible for 75% of current worldwide military spending. The US Congress recently passed a bill with nearly $100 million in military aid for Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan. This clearly shows that it is US imperialism that is driving the worsening militarism and threats to peace in Europe and West and East Asia. In relation to Palestine, bourgeois democracy is daily exposed as an illusion, as millions marched in favour of a ceasefire, yet the capitalist powers ignored the demands of the people and to continue to both arm and give diplomatic cover to the Zionist killing machine. Once again, the Irish capitalist class is on the side of imperialism. The Irish ruling class and its political representatives have completely ignored the anti-colonial traditions of our people. Redmondism, rejected by the Irish people in the 1918 election, is now the unofficial ideology of the state. It has kept the outward symbols of the Republican tradition, such as the national flag, the anthem, and the name of the National Parliament. However, the content is far removed from the Republic proclaimed in 1916. On international affairs, the privately owned and the state media act as echo chambers for NATO and the US State Department. Irish neutrality, a central part of Connolly's policy, is denigrated as insular and backward. Just as in 1916, the ruling class and the media push a sham internationalism. This time, the EU, and what is described as the rules-based international order, is held up as the ideal to which we backward Irish must adhere. Micheál Martin has claimed that the present situation, requiring a resolution from the UN Security Council before Irish troops can be deployed abroad, limits Irish sovereignty. At the same time, he has claimed that the Irish state cannot recognise the state of Palestine unless the EU as a whole does so. We should also remember that the Occupied Territories Bill was not enacted due to Ireland's membership of the EU. We can clearly see from whence the threat to sovereignty comes. Comrades, Connolly in his political activity and his theoretical work developed a strategy for the labour movement in a subject country in times of peace, war and revolution. The history of the international communist movement, especially the struggles for national liberation, has also bequeathed us a rich experience from which to draw inspiration as imperialism threatens to destroy the world in its pursuit of profits. We cannot stay silent as the drums of war grow exceedingly louder. In Europe, we are experiencing the direct impact of the US-NATO proxy war against Russia and an ever-increasing death toll among the Ukrainian and Russian soldiers and civilians. The Communist Party of Ireland condemned the Russian invasion. However, despite the claims made by the US, the UK, the EU and their allies, we recognise that the invasion was not unprovoked. The continued eastward expansion of NATO and the EU-NATO coup in 2014, which installed a pro-NATO government, which included Nazi elements, was seen as a threat by the Russian ruling class and also by the Russian working class. The burning to death of Ukrainian opponents of the coup by Ukrainian Nazis in Odessa, the military attacks on ethnic Russian communities in eastern Ukraine, which led to 14,000 deaths before the Russian invasion, and the discrimination against Russian speakers in Ukraine were supported by the EU and NATO. The decision to offer NATO membership to the Ukraine and the possibility of basing nuclear weapons there was bound to result in a Russian reaction. The US saw this as a win-win situation. If Russia did not take action, NATO would have forward bases on Russia's border. And if Russia invaded, the US believed that NATO armed and trained Ukrainian forces would win. The US-NATO decades-long strategy of using fascist and reactionary forces inside Ukraine to advance the global strategy against both Russia and the People's Republic of China has resulted in the loss of tens of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian working-class lives. It has also resulted in increases in food and energy prices and in the massive increase in profits for mainly US, but also UK and European arms companies, as billions of euros, pounds and dollars has been diverted from social spending to weapons of mass destruction. Irrespective of military aid, the US-NATO-Russia proxy war in Ukraine is beginning to tilt in Russia's favour, with the pro-Ukrainian forces uninterested in peace talks. And recently we had the new Polish government declaring its willingness to host nuclear weapons aimed at Russia. And France's Macron has also made inflammatory statements about putting NATO troops into Ukraine should it look like Russia's on the verge of winning. The only lasting solution to this war is a serious peace negotiation between Ukraine and Russia, organised by the United Nations and free of all outside interference. Past experience of such peace negotiation has shown that the US, Britain and Germany deliberately interfered in the peace negotiations and prevented a peaceful solution in Ukraine. An immediate ceasefire is necessary to stop the slaughter and waste of lives. The solution will be found in security and defence agreements between Russia and Ukraine, and the establishment of a neutral Ukraine plus the withdrawal of NATO forces from Russia's borders. The defeat of the US-NATO strategy in Ukraine is essential to bring an end to this war and other global conflicts. There are those, including some who see themselves as being on the left, who claim that a NATO failure to defeat Russia poses a threat to Ireland. Only a supporter of the existing system, with Ireland dominated by the US, the UK and EU imperialism, could hold such a view. To those people, I will quote Connolly in relation to Britain during the First World War. who, in words which are applicable to the US and NATO today, said, "The empire is founded upon the misery of the toiling masses. Its security is based upon the submission of the dispossessed working class. Its triumph will establish its industrial and political supremacy more firmly than ever. Its humiliation, on the contrary, will allow other peoples to take their rightful place among the nations of the world and enable the working class to pursue their path to prosperity and freedom. Comrades, a strategic defeat for the NATO alliance will open up new opportunities to advance the struggle for national liberation and socialism in Ireland." Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Jimmy. Our second speaker will be Bernardo Guanche Hernandez, the Cuban Ambassador to Ireland, who works tirelessly to embed and strengthen the links between our two countries, drawing parallels between the anti-imperialist struggles both here and in Cuba.
Comrades all, I'm very honored this afternoon to pay tribute to a historical figure of the stature of James Connolly, a prominent Marxist and fighter whose example and thought remains valid and increasingly unequal and militarist world. Connolly was one of the few great leftist leaders in Europe who opposed to the First World War, as did Lenin, who decreed on peace on November 8, 1917, proposed an immediate withdrawal of Russia from the First World War. This great wave of class struggles in Ireland was cut short by the war, but Connolly maintaining a fair internationalist position like Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, and other internationalists. The heroic fight of Connolly and his comrades was a real note. Although they were massacred, their example inspired the great revolutionary movement of the working class in later years. James Connolly is a part of the best revolutionary legacy of Ireland and the world. And what was happening in Cuba in 1916 when Connolly was murdered? Since the beginning of the 19th century, while still under Spain's rule, Cuba attracted the greed of the United States. In 1805, Thomas Jefferson, the young nation's first president of the United States, stretched the strategic importance of the island, Cuba, and expressed their desire for an easy conquest. In 1823, John King Adams, then Secretary of State, developed the famous low-hanging fruit theory that recalled the existence of the law of the political gravitation and the unnatural nature of the ties between Cuba and Spain. The island could only gravitate around the North American Union. That same Jefferson noted that Cuba would be the most interesting addition to our system of states. During the 19th century, Washington proposed to Spain no less than 6 times to acquire the island and made offer of the $100 million for Cuba. The United States decided to impose its tutelage on Cuba through the Platt Amendment, forcibly integrated into the new Constitution of Cuba, which unequally limited the sovereignty of the island and authorized, among others, military intervention whenever the White House considered that its interests were in danger. This was the case in 1906, 1912, and 1916, which reminded Cuba each time of imperfect nature of our independence. In 1953, the attack on the Moncada barrack marked the beginning of the insurrectional period. On January 1st, 1959, Batista's military regime was overthrown, giving birth to a new era in Cuba history. The advent of the Cuban Revolution, which the Eisenhower administration opposed from the beginning, as well as the process of the socioeconomic transformation, generated a strong tension with the United States, which imposed economic sanctions and developed a secret program aimed at overthrowing the government of Cuba starting in 1960. Over time, U.S. diplomatic rhetoric evolved to justify hostility toward Cuba. The Republican Eisenhower administration evoked the process of nationalization and expropriation to explain the imposition of the first sanction against Cuba. Democratic President John F. Kennedy relied on the alliance with the Soviet Union to explain the reinforcement of coercive measures in February 1962. Then his successors, respectively, allude to Havana's support for the revolutionary and independence movement in the world, particularly in Latin America and Africa, to justify maintaining hostility policy toward Cuba. Since the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, every president of the United States, from George Bush to Joe Biden, through Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, have raised the issue of democracy and human rights to justify the persistence of sanctions against Cuba. Fidel educated Cubans under the principle of extending a generous hand to the people in need and placed solidarity and integration at the center of the country's foreign policy. Fidel made internationalist solidarity a pillar of the revolution, providing support to movements that fought against imperial oppression in Latin America, Africa, and wherever it was needed. Algeria was the first to benefit from Cuban aid in December 1961, while waging its war against the French colonialism. Likewise, Cuba played a key role in the fights against apartheid. Cuba has carried out nearly 600,000 missions in 158 countries with all types of medical consultation, such as birth, surgical operation, and vaccination. I would like to take this opportunity to denounce Israel's cruel genocide against Palestine. He always expressed his solidarity with the Palestine cause, and currently hundreds of students from that Arab country are studying in Cuba. My country is going through a difficult economic situation due to the impacts of the United States economic blockade, brutally reinforced in the context of the COVID-19. Very aggressive measures taken by the government of the former President Trump and still in force, such as its ultimate designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, cause enormous cost and serious humanitarian consequences for the Cuban people. The Cuban people and the international community are aware of the dishonest campaign that the government of the United States has launched since 2019 to discredit Cuban International Medical Corporation, exert pressure on the government that have asked for it and deprive people of this health service. In their campaigns against Cuba, any pretext is valid. Even religion freedom in Cuba, a right endorsed by the country's constitution, are distorted and questioned. Since 1929, The blockade has been tightened to the extreme. It would be no exaggeration to affirm that the consequence of this siege could be described as devastating. This means that the solidarity with Cuba must continue to strengthen until one day the criminal blockade is definitely lifted. Cuba has the right to live without a blockade. Cuba reaffirms that it's a stable, safe, united country capable of facing great challenges with creativity, effort, and that is the population is not in danger. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for this invitation to this act and reiterate our appreciation for your unwavering support. Long live the Communist Party of Ireland.
Thank you very much.